Thank you, Richard, and welcome everyone to this evening's lecture, which is being held in conjunction with our current exhibition, Picturing the Banjo, which was organized by the Palmer Museum at the Pennsylvania State University in University Park. After debuting at the Corcoran Gallery in Washington, D.C., the exhibition opened at the Palmer and then came to us here at the Athenaeum, where it will be on view through October 21st. If you've not seen the exhibition, or even if you have, I hope you will visit our galleries. They will be open after the lecture this evening. I also invite you to take a piece of this event home with you by buying a copy of the very readable and beautifully illustrated catalog, which is on sale at the front desk. I'm happy to note that the press has reacted quite favorably to Picturing the Banjo in the last couple of weeks. And in fact, the Boston Globe recently called it, quote, a curatorial gem. Credit for all of that belongs to a curatorial gem himself, the curator of the show and the principal author of its catalog, our evening speaker, Leo Mezzo. Leo is curator of American art at the Palmer Museum and an affiliate assistant professor in the Department of Art History at Penn State. Besides Picturing the Banjo, he's curated a number of exhibitions and authored their accompanying catalogs, including Arneson and the Object and George Ennis, the 1880s and 1890s. On a personal and almost coincidental note, I should add that I recently had the pleasure of being co-author with Leo on a catalog for another current exhibition, Visions of the Susquehanna, 250 Years of Paintings by American Masters, which is now at the Lancaster Museum of Art, and then will travel to 4 additional venues in Pennsylvania, Maryland, and New York. We can all look forward to the fruition of Leo's current projects that focus respectively on Thomas Hart Benton's river imagery and George Ennis's tonalism. But luckily, we need not wait to benefit from his scholarship, for he is here tonight to talk with us about floral rebels, Dixie Chicks, and other banjo-wielding women. Ladies and gentlemen, Leo Mezzo.
Well, thank you very much for having me here to speak tonight. Before diving into all things banjo, I want to before David leaves the room, I'd like to just say, David Dieringer, thank you very much for making this exhibition happen here. I just want to give my sincere gratitude to you, Richard Wendorf, Hina Hirayama, for, you plan an exhibition like this, and if it just shows in your own backyard. I mean, I worked on this thing for about 4 years, and it's kind of like, if you can't show it other places, it's kind of like being all dressed up with no place to go. And this is one heck of a place for it to go. And it means so much to the Palmer Museum of Art and to Penn State University and to myself, of course, as curator of this project, to have it come here to the Boston Athenaeum. You're excused now, David. I also want to recognize someone in the audience tonight. Jim Bowman happens to be with us tonight. Jim Bowman, I'm not going to ask you to stand or anything. I'm not going to call too much attention to you, except to say that Jim Bowman's enthusiasm for banjo, for banjos and their manufacturing history and the culture of banjos in the United States has piqued and sustained not only my interest, but several old-time music enthusiasts, banjo collectors, art and cultural historians alike. And Jim, this is actually the second exhibition that I've planned to which he has lent numerous highlights from his collection. And can everybody hear me? No. Okay. Can we turn up the sound a little bit, and I will make it my business to speak a little more closely into the mic. In addition to helping out in addition to being an informal curator, a colleague on several projects, he's also lent several works to this exhibition, and I'm just so very grateful to call him my friend and colleague. So, Jim, thank you very, very much. If I could have the lights, please. Please interrupt me if you cannot hear, and I will adjust accordingly. The banjo is one of the most frequently encountered symbols in American art and cultural history. Yet the instrument is also one of the most elastic and contested signs in that history, its meaning readily appropriated to disparate ends. Banjos have an altogether different pedigree and set of associations than the violins, guitars, and pianos that one also finds in 18th, 19th, and 20th century American art. Unlike those instruments, the banjo carries a distinctly African heritage, which is central to its interpretation. Beginning around the 1840s, wildly popular traveling minstrel troupes helped create market demand for inexpensively produced banjos. The instrument would become a standard motif in American genre painting, appearing in such works as Thomas Akins's The Dancing Lesson at Left of 1878 and Henry Ossawa Tanner's rather canonical Banjo Lesson of 1894. In these paintings, as has been pointed out by many, the banjo denotes self-culture, intellect, and pedagogy, challenging the demeaning stereotypes found in popular prints such as this Currier and Ives piece from 1868 and sheet music covers. Now, in exploring the production of racial difference, however, scholars really have not made much of the fact that for the most part, these canonical pictures almost always portray male musicians. What happens, however, when women and girls literally enter the picture? Anglo-female banjoists appear in myriad American paintings, photographs, and illustrations of the Gilded Age and Progressive era, and their presence is equally apparent and yet more charged in 20th century materials. This is a good example of a piece of knowledge I certainly would not know had Jim Bowman not written about this in his book, America's Instrument, the Banjo in the 19th Century, which is published by the University of North Carolina Press. I first saw this image from his collection reproduced in that volume, and it's probably, he and his co-author Philip Gura point out, the earliest known photograph of a woman playing a banjo. But these images that proliferated in the late 19th and early 20th century of women playing the banjo indeed suggest the instrument's role in evolving conceptions of sexuality, autonomy, and selfhood. Now, as much as I'm laying out what I am talking about, I want to make clear that there are many exceptions to the rules I'll be proposing tonight, because I'm really not talking about the world of music or even the social manufacturing history of banjos, so much as I'm talking about the metaphor and the image of the banjo in an evolving American mindset. So these images from around 1880 through the turn of the century, artists aligned the banjo with female achievement and enlightenment. Excuse me. But the banjo was at best an ambiguous emblem of early 20th century new womanhood, with any hint of feminist reform tempered by the literary, visual, and commercial contexts in which a bevy of increasingly coquettish banjo-wielding women appear. In what follows, I will trace this evolution, examining both the instrument's symbolism, female symbolism in American art and popular music to some extent, but also the appropriation and invention of banjo mythologies by advertisers, reformers, entertainers, and manufacturers of musical instruments. A survey of artistic and commercial images of banjo-playing women suggests that the true subject of each work might well be a claim to female autonomy. I will conclude with the proposition that challenges to the banjo's gender specificity have only become more apparent in recent times. Since the early 1990s, the banjo has almost consistently garnered ambivalent and contradictory responses from visual artists, popular musicians, and their audiences. We find the banjo's market-ready symbolism in full force, but we also find the instrument playing significant roles in selected challenges to male hegemonies in the commercial art and music worlds alike. This is exemplified, I think, in the work of the contemporary artists Margaret Kilgallon and Claire Rojas and the singing group Dixie Chicks. Ultimately, what I'd like to suggest is that the trajectory of images here suggests at times both the uplifting and denigrating potential of the banjo and the pairing of one's body with one's worth. As Jim Bowman and Philip Gura have amply documented, banjo tutorials, clubs, sheet music, and shops helped create and sustain an enormous market for banjos in the decades following the American Civil War. This created intense competitions among such firms as the Dobson Brothers of New York, S.S. Stewart of Philadelphia, and of course A.C. Fairbanks here in Boston. Well, a strong visual component characterizes the banjo cultures of Gilded Age and Progressive Era America too. By the 1890s, banjo imagery would appear not only throughout the pages of several stringed instrument magazines, but on banknotes, stationery, furniture, playing cards, linens, pillows, and countless advertisements of goods, soaps, cough drops, tobacco products, often having little to do with banjos or music. Images of banjo-wielding women figure prominently in this visual culture, with music and performance offering an arena in which to demonstrate intellectual achievements and social ideals. Perhaps most famous are a group of pictures by the American-born impressionist Mary Cassatt, who depicted the banjo subject on at least 6 occasions. In her print, The Banjo Lesson, dating to 1893, a girl looks over the shoulder of an older woman, presumably teaching her to play a song or maybe demonstrating a chord or picking pattern. Jim Bowman has confided to me in private conversation when I was doing research for this exhibition. I was trying to figure out what all the different kinds of banjos were. And this, in fact, may be no banjo at all. It may, in fact, be some type of artist's prop. At any rate, one thing we do know is that the image of the banjo-playing woman, see this vignette at far right here? This is a lunette from the Women's Hall, Women's Pavilion at the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition. And the banjo player of the imagery in the print comes from the far right vignette. You can barely make it out at upper right, where the female allegorical personification of music is embodied as a banjo player. In Cassatt's print and in the mural, the figures' physical engrossment, as well as their intent gaze upon the instrument's fingerboard, characterizes much late 19th century female banjo iconography. And one of the first things we may notice is that all these banjo-wielding women are white. Concurrent with this feminization of the banjo was an anglicization of the instrument. With its African origins, possession of a banjo may well have signified a taste for the exotic, a taste for a certain elitist class status. But as for the exotic, that would be from a distance. In some cases, purchasing a banjo, posing alongside one in a photograph, also acknowledged participation in a market economy. And by 1900, the instrument came to signify taste and decorum when displayed in a parlor. Banjos, that is, carried the taint of high art. The commercial feminization of the banjo is suggested in Charles Courtney Curran's studio painting of 1887, Fair Critics, in which the instrument, which you see the head of it, it's propped up against the back wall, just left of center. in which the instrument is among so many pieces of what we might call aesthetic furniture under the white female patron's purview in an artist's studio. The instrument joins the paintings, fans, prints, carpets, mirrors, and vases of examples of what some magazines categorized as the feminine realm of bric-a-brac. Several artworks depicting banjoists exhibit a similar Cassatt-like merging of mental and manual facilities. This includes Child Hassam's watercolor. A familiar tune at left, dating from the mid-1880s, an early piece, in which motionless kittens join the banjo in facilitating the mood of musical meditation. Similarly, Sarah de St. Prix Whitman's painting, A Song, dating to 1883, depicts her fellow Bostonian, Mabel Bayard Warren, holding a banjo. By the 1880s, the banjo had become a popular accoutrement for the new woman, the growing movement towards greater freedom and autonomy for women. Matching a sentimentalized realm of late 19th century American parlor culture in which banjo playing was increasingly the norm, inscribed on the painting at upper right, and you certainly can't see it here, but you can. This painting's on display just outside the exhibition. Inscribed on the painting, alongside the artist's signature, are the lines by French poet Alfred de Musset, translating to, "I walk better when my hand is in yours." With sober gaze and command of the instrument's fingerboard, these female banjoists bespeak intellectual and psychological absorption. In this regard, one of the most remarkable, if not terribly well-known, surviving images is Francis Benjamin Johnston's photograph of Anna Apperson at left, dating to 1895. Carefully choreographed and loaded with symbolism, this photographic print tells us much about the feminization of the banjo in late 19th century America, perhaps pointing as well to its potential as an emblem of cultural and maybe even sexual liberation. Well, what are we looking at? Situated in a corner of reformer and philanthropist Phoebe Apperson Hearst's rather monumental Washington, D.C. mansion, Apperson, who was Hearst's niece, plays the banjo adjacent to a neoclassical sculpture of Flora, a mythological figure traditionally enlisted by artists, of course, to suggest not just libidinous longing, but fruitfulness, obviously. In Johnston's photograph, however, Flora appears to have dropped her attribute. Note the bouquet prominently placed in the foreground just before the sculpture. So in her acting out or tableau vivant of the sculpture, Apperson has exchanged, it seems, flowers for banjo, performing and concentrating where Flora, as a sculpture, once stood immobile and vacant. It appears that photographer and philanthropist have joined forces to destabilize a time-honored construction of fragile, fecund femininity. The trading of flowers for banjo transforms Flora from idle to performative and from vacant to cerebral, in short, from passive to active in Johnston's photograph. There are some late 19th century photographic portraits of women that convey similar meanings, removing their subjects from very narrowly circumscribed theatrical sentimentality. One photograph from about 1895, for example, shows a self-possessed Teresa Vaughan. The seamstress adeptly plays a Boston-made Fairbanks electric banjo. The photograph was likely used to publicize the popular variety acts that Vaughan and her husband, W.A. Mestier, performed on New York stages in the 1880s and 1890s. And it's significant that Vaughan, like Apperson in Johnston's photograph, does not pose with, but actually plays her banjo, simultaneously sliding down with her thumb and plucking upward with her ring and index fingers, and smiling and balancing herself on the faux fence. Vaughan plays the instrument with the sureness and poise of a professional. Like Apperson and Johnston, as well as Cassatt's protagonist in the print we just saw, Vaughan has little use for the flowers, the flora, below her at right. Armed with her banjo, she seeks rewards and merits attributes of a different, higher sort. It's equally remarkable that she holds the electric model manufactured by the A.C. Fairbanks Company, which advertised itself as the makers of highest grade banjos. And by the way, this banjo is no more really electric than a 1950s atomic dishwasher is atomic, of course. So, with 22 frets capable of 3 octaves, this so-called electric banjo, a thoroughly up-to-date instrument in every respect, promised, according to an advertisement, to mark a new era in the banjo world. The professional-grade instrument certainly finds its match in Vaughan's expert fingering and confident demeanor. If this modern electric banjo marked a new era, the instrument may have found its human equivalent in Vaughan, Hurst, Johnston, and other new women. We don't have to look very far to find additional paintings, photographs, and decorative arts coupling banjos with bouquets, floral gatherings, and other, unfortunately, time-honored signs of femininity. Yet for every instance of a Cassatt or a Johnston replacing the latter with the former, deflowering flora, so to speak, we find several far more ambiguous images. An early 20th century match safe, for example, contrasts contrasts an absorbed banjo-playing woman with a leafy backdrop, in this case appearing to modern eyes like a ground approximating William Morris wallpaper motifs. Equally ambiguous and certainly much more sexually charged is a circa 1888 painting by Henry Siddons Mowbray called Fairy Music, which depicts a banjo in a topless woman's hands. The woman is surrounded by foliage, flora, and wears a dress bedecked with plant motifs, of course. Mowbray, the artist whose work we see at right, Mowbray's banjo-wielding woman announces an iconographical shift from performative to passive. Where Cassatt and Johnston present the banjo as a sign of women's intellectual awakening via music, the model here engages the senses of touch and sight. In Fairy Music, you gotta love that title, the banjo joins the woman's gaze and fertile landscape in a sensory appeal to the viewer. The subject's passivity and suggestion of sexual availability stand at odds with the other works. Mowbray's painting grounds the female subject, banjo in hand, in what we might call the conventional constrictions of flora. But perhaps most problematic here is the question of for whom these women perform, if in fact they're performing in the first place. The woman on the match safe maybe helps to sell the product, while Mowbray's nymph effectively performs her sexuality. Like the female models in so many late 19th century American paintings, these women help sell artwork, music, appliances, and certainly not least banjos. Yet more difficult to interpret is a group of photographs by Thomas Akins depicting a model named Blanche Gilroy, which do not couple the figure with fertility, but rather an act of arousal that leads to her death. In one picture, the classic, which we see at left, these are all around 1885. The classically garbed Gilroy here in Akins's studio diffidently faces the viewer, photographer, as she sits up on a bed and holds erect a banjo seen from behind, as if she's been told to retain that pose. Also disquieting is another photograph from this series, in which the horizontal, seemingly dead woman finds her attribute in the equally lifeless, unplayed banjo at left. Where do these works get the title Blanche Gilroy from? I don't know. The image at the Getty and the image, this work at the left is at the Met, and this work exists at the Getty, and this particular version is from the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. Some of these images have the name Blanche Gilroy written on them. I don't know exactly what this means, but I do think that if this photograph was identified in Akins's time as Blanche Gilroy, that the title and imagery might have recalled a novel by a woman named Margaret Hosmer called Blanche Gilroy, A Girl's Story, which dates to 1871. Significantly, in this novel, in several passages, the author pairs prostrate, ailing, and dead women with silenced music. Promotional materials and musical paraphernalia suggest the zeal with which banjo manufacturers and retailers targeted a female audience. As early as 1865, William H. Harless of New York had marketed himself as, quote, an inventor and manufacturer of patent American ladies and parlor banjos. Thus, when Harless advertised his open-back banjos as, quote, less likely to injure the person or clothing in handling the instrument rapidly, end quote, he may well have had in mind a female clientele, not just male performers. The historian Karen Lynn notes that manufacturers and retailers often advertised banjos as being more appropriate than guitar for ladies, claiming that guitar playing caused women to sit in an unfeminine position, and that banjo strings were less likely to hurt delicate fingers than guitar strings. A few firms included the word lady in names of banjo models. In some cases, the manufacturer enlisted the designation to suggest that the instrument was meant to be played by women. In other instances, the gendered moniker ascribed to a sensual, although I think really vaguely defined, feminine ideal. In the 1890s, S.S. Stewart marketed a miniaturized Lady Stewart banjo, and in 1901, Boston's A.C. Fairbanks produced the White Lady. Stewart's is called the Lady Stewart banjo, A.C. Fairbanks produces the White Lady banjo, which would prove to be the company's best-selling instrument. These examples corroborate a trend identified by historian James Noonan, in which women are paired with stringed instruments in a triple personification of helpmate, muse, and mother. And we might add, looking at the Akins we just saw, femme fatale. Importantly, the Fairbanks instrument being called a White Lady points to the ease with which late 19th century American banjo cultures could manipulate the instrument's racially charged legacy. Women frequently bought and were given banjos as gifts in the decades following the Civil War, with banjo becoming a common parlor activity for society ladies. Increasingly, banjos were marketed to men and women by way of yellow and pink straps, respectively. This is Thomas Hope's Still Life with Banjo of 1884. By the late 19th century, banjos formed the musical core of several women's stringed instrument clubs, one of which we see in this photograph dating to about 1890. The vogue for female banjo groups continued into the following decades. Among the women banjoists who would perform publicly in the early 20th century are Dorothy Kenton, Gladys Moore, a.k.a. Mary Pickford, Cassie Bacon, and in a group from Boston called the Fadettes. Certainly many of them understood the banjo's status as an icon of high art and feminine accomplishment. Writing in the music trade magazine The Cadenza in October 1908, one female banjoist commented, quote, "What makes me boil to the roots of my hair is to read that we play like girls. We do not. We play like musicians. There is no sex in music," end quote. These comments, however, suggest the struggles of women to be taken seriously as professional banjoists. Most of these musicians indeed played on vaudeville stages where any musical adeptness, or feminist undercurrent for that matter, could easily get lost amid the comedic antics, burlesque acts, animal tricks, and acrobatics with which this entertainment genre defined itself. New York and Boston newspapers of the period certainly contained mentions of the Fadettes, Dorothy Kenton, and other female banjo players, Yet their names are typically lost in long rosters of entertainers following or supporting headlining acts. In amusement display ads, the tiny script of their names is dwarfed by the exaggerated fonts hyperbolically announcing male performers. More successful and popular were those female vaudevillians who left the banjo playing to others, individuals such as Lillian Hairline, whom we see here, and perhaps most notably Eva Teenge, who combined tight-fitting outfits and seductive gazes to add sexual titillation to their performances. By the early 20th century, the intellectually engrossed female banjoist, as Frances Benjamin Johnston and Mary Cassatt had depicted her, had lost much of her iconic force. This is not to say, however, that some new women would not have identified the banjo as a sign of liberation and transcendence. Advertisers and manufacturers certainly encouraged young American women to make such a connection, as if creating a market for banjo-wielding feminists. In around 1920, a toy company produced banjo-playing flapper figurine dolls. A circa 1915 advertisement for Abdallah cigarettes presents the poised model somehow holding a mixed drink, a lit cigarette, and a hybrid mandolin banjo. The shift from Frances Benjamin Johnston's mentally absorbed figure to the exoticized Abdallah girl or the ready-to-sell figurine fits a larger pattern historian Carolyn Kitch has found in mass media visual imagery of the period. The recurring serious-minded college girl of advertising circa 1900, Kitch observes, is replaced by the 1920s with images of carefree, scantily clad, and often hedonistic women. While I am most concerned here with feminizations of the banjo, if it can be called that, we can really never get too far from the instrument's racially vexed legacy. The emergence and popularity of Henry Tanner's canonical banjo lesson in the mid-1890s hardly marked an end to the racial contests waged through the banjo in its visual representation. While oil paintings would begin to follow in the footsteps of Tanner's humane treatment of the instrument and its performers, sheet music illustrations would continue to perpetuate the myth of the dim-witted, out-of-control African banjoist. And in many of these, we find women, not men, as the protagonists. Selected late 19th and early 20th century images match cacophonous animals with female African-American banjoists in need of de-amplification. Somebody wrote, it's always bruising to one's ego when you read a comic book at an exhibition and someone says, "How could this be? What do you mean?" Someone made a very good point that she didn't see this as, I wrote in the wall label something about the chicken or rooster being de-amplified or soothed by the banjo. And being a good art historian, perhaps I am pushing it a little bit, but I think that we do need to look at images like this in the context of late 19th, early 20th century America. Particularly, there were noise laws, anti-noise laws, which prohibited beating on loud drums. They prohibited banjo, gourds of any kind, because gourds were you could transmit secret codes by way of gourds, which would facilitate insurrection and rebellion. So I think there's something I personally believe there's something quite charged about an African American woman playing very sedately and politely behaving, about to fall off a tree, playing a banjo with a chicken. I read that as rather demeaning and not funny in the least. Because here, in this 1899 sheet music illustration, Dusky Dinah and the rooster share a precariously extending tree branch, with the caption suggesting that both figures will have difficulty keeping still. Dinah, however, soothes herself and the clamorous bird with the instrument. The musician mimics a well-behaved animal, perhaps providing a stark metaphor for the domestication of a human being. A lithograph by the African-American printmaker Dox Thrash called Inveigling, dating to 1940 to 41, demonstrates how race and gender might conjoin in a 20th century context, with a similar result of loss of bodily control. Inveigling is defined by the OED as to blind in mind or judgment, to beguile, deceive, cajole, to entice, lure, or seduce. That the banjo is an agent of sexual entrapment here is suggested in the figure of the woman at right, who raises her right leg so that it practically touches the instrument. Her clasped hands evoke both prayer and enchantment, as if she is so taken by her suitor that she worships at his banjo shrine. Inveigling certainly enlists the banjo to redress the very racism it has been used to enforce, yet the inclusion of the woman prompts us to consider the instrument as a different sort of power social tool, one invested with sexual powers. A way to pick up women, Thomas Hart Benton might have phrased it, and came awfully close to phrasing it in his illustrations for this rather lurid Steinbeck-esque novel from 1943 called Taps for Private Tussie, in which Uncle George waits to play his fiddle while Uncle Mott again tries to seduce the woman with the banjo. With the woman in the Thrash print at left spellbound and exhilarated by her suitor's music, the image evokes a modern trend in racially charged film and theater in which playing or simply possessing stringed instruments invariably leads to emotional quagmire of loss of bodily control. Significantly, the Thrash print and the Benton print depict women reacting to the banjo, not making sounds with it. As I will discuss shortly, these are two of the very few high art images dating from the mid-20th century depicting a woman, white or black, anywhere near a banjo. The visual culture of advertisements and promotional materials shows that whatever agency and resolve earlier depictions of banjo-wielding women had suggested was lost by the 1920s and 30s, when subjects appear less as serious musicians than as silly, light-hearted playthings. Their banjos make clear an appeal that was at once sexual and commercial. Popular banjo imagery enforced ideals of female submission to men and market forces alike by casting diminutive women alongside and in the shadows of gigantic banjos that they alternately play and fondle. Perhaps particularly illuminating here are the efforts of the Bacon and Day Banjo Company to promote its products through a series of nationwide banjo competitions in which the winner was awarded a professional-grade instrument from the company. In 1924, Bacon and Day would hire as its spokesman this wonderful, renowned former vaudevillian Ray Montana Coleman, who we see at far left raising his hat, who promoted the contest with the ultimate goal of selling Bacon banjos. A group of photographs from the Bacon and Day tour when they hit the Pantages Theater in Los Angeles depicts Coleman, this is the image at left, and a group of young, attractive women posing with, and in some cases standing on, a gigantic banjo provided by the Bacon and Day Company. In the image at left, women form brackets around the instrument, smiling and laughing as they play the fingerboard of the phallus-like behemoth. In another photograph, one of the models has mounted the rim of the giant banjo as if straddling it. The woman we see here, by the way, her name's Gracie Carlos. She was a member of a synchronized swim troupe called Madeline Berlow's Bathing Beauties, who were performing at the Pantages that week. But the image at left appeared on the cover of the Cadenza, the stringed instrument magazine, in 1924. This is a widely read magazine, certainly by musical enthusiasts, and it did have a reputation for publishing sexually suggestive photographs and drawings of couples huddled around stringed instruments. These episodes suggest that by the 1920s, the image of the banjo-wielding women carried a rather transparent marketing appeal and pecuniary potential. Advertisers and publishers, as well as their intended audiences, would surely not understand these women as musicians, but as smiling seductresses, muses less for art than for mercantile exchange. The Coleman Pantages photographs, aren't these great images, point to an impossibility of women performing music. The colossal banjo, of course, is no banjo at all. Positioning her hands on the fingerboard in a manner more reminiscent of a double bass performance in a banjo recital, Carlos symbolizes the absurdity of banjo-wielding women in a culture of business and exchange. She is no more a banjoist than Mowbray's Floral Nymph in fairy music or Akins's Enchanting but expiring Blanche Gilroy. 20th century films and Broadway productions occasionally cast banjo-wielding women in similar roles of subordination. And when I say these are great images, I don't mean that I'm saying yee-haw, I agree with these ideologies. I don't. But I want to call attention to the manner in which films and Broadway use the banjo's physical domination of the female subject to enforce her role as a purveyor of humor and ostensibly playful titillation. Such dynamics are at work in the 1936 film version of George M. Cohan's The Song and Dance Man, in which Mary Blackwood joins a chorus line of fellow actresses dancing with and gyrating about the larger-than-life banjos in their hands. Effectively quelling their would-be banjo players, their female players, these big banjos eliminate the possibility of musical performance. We might even call it the imagery of non-performance, consigning women to at best supporting roles and symbolically detaching them from male-dominated entertainment industries. The iconography of non-performance in these images attests to trends in early 20th century folk genres and later in commercial country and Western music. Women often played guitar or fiddle and sometimes keyboard, but more often they performed as singers and only rarely were showcased as banjoists. So the question then is, why might we find fewer females performing professionally on the banjo than on the guitar, the mandolin, the fiddle, or the piano? The historian Robert Cantwell has weighed in on this topic, contrasting wry, arid banjo symbolism with wholesome feminine metaphors for guitars and other stringed instruments. The banjo, he observes, is, quote, not maidenly like the violin, nor voluptuous like the guitar. Rather, he writes, it is, quote, more like a tomboy sister or spinster aunt, full of gristle and sass, end quote. From such a simile, we might conclude that banjos project unladylike, if not male, associations upon their 20th century performers. As Cantwell and others remind us, the music in which the banjo has figured prominently provides its own brand of machismo, with virility, honor, competition, and in some cases duels as traditional motifs in songs. Think of dueling banjos from Deliverance, for example. Between the 1940s and the late 1980s, surprisingly few banjo-playing women appear in American painting, sculpture, and drawing. And any study of this topic is bound to encounter difficulties accounting for and explaining this 40-year span. A database of banjos in art and visual culture maintained since 2002 at the Palmer Museum of Art at Penn State University, numbering more than 600 works total, contains only one painting from this period depicting a female banjoist. Appearing more frequently are advertisements and album covers with women caressing the instrument, as on the Big Bend Banjo Band's late 1950s record, Happy Banjos, where the attractive model in a low-cut dress flirts with the viewer and the smiling, phallic, happy banjo in her hands. Well, women banjoists did not perform or record in really huge numbers during this period, and so perhaps it's misleading to cite the dearth of female performers, since many music fans might be equally unfamiliar with male banjoists. Asked to name banjo players in modern popular music, one might point to Bela Fleck, or if one is schooled in modern bluegrass, I don't know, the Del McCurry Band or Earl Scruggs. One might also mention such all-male rock acts like Neil Young or the Eagles, who during the 70s on occasion showcased the banjo. Identifying women playing professionally on the banjo today is yet trickier. There's certainly no shortage of extraordinarily adept and accomplished female musicians in contemporary country and bluegrass music, such as Alison Krauss, Alison Brown, Iris DeMent, and Rhonda Vincent, to name only some of the most obvious. So I'm going to switch gears now and talk about banjo imagery in contemporary popular culture. For many aficionados of contemporary rock, country, and alternative genres, however, the Emily Robeson of the Dixie Chicks may be the only female banjoist who comes to mind. For Robeson, the instrument is hardly some prop enlisted in a sensual appeal to a listener or beholder. The Dixie Chicks' emergence as serious musicians in a self-defined country bluegrass rock genre has contributed to the group's problematic status among traditional conservative country music audiences who have grown accustomed to men, not women, performing on the banjo. So granted, yes, the Dixie Chicks are musicians, not visual artists, but I believe the recent events involving the group shed no small amount of light on the image and the metaphor that we associate with the banjo-wielding woman. For a measure of just how volatile the image of the banjo-wielding woman remains to the present day, why won't this slide come up? There we go. There's Emily Robeson again. We might revisit a fairly recent incident involving the Dixie Chicks, one that you all probably know well, that initially may appear to have little to do with the banjo. But the group's experiences not only illuminate the banjo's contemporary symbolism, but also help us understand the paucity of female banjoists in art, advertising, and music from the 1940s through the 1980s. As is by now pretty well known, in March 2003, the group's singer, Natalie Maines, announced to a London concert audience, quote, "Just so you know, we're ashamed the President of the United States is from Texas," end quote. Her comments prompted American radio station boycotts of Dixie Chicks music, resulting by the end of the month in a 20% drop in airplay and a 30% drop in CD sales. In response to the thousands of protesters flooding radio station telephone lines and internet sites, one conglomerate, Cumulus Media, even instructed its 42 country music stations to stop playing Dixie Chicks music. They eventually lifted the ban. How could Maines, a native of Lubbock, Texas, editorials asked, bash her fellow Texan, the president? Ever cognizant of the bad press, the Chicks quoted their hate mail and editorials with faux bumper stickers on their nude bodies on an Entertainment Weekly cover. The incident would eventually fuel its own sub-controversies in the American press, including a rift between legal commentator Patricia J. Williams and comedian Politico Mo Rocca in the pages of The Nation. But well before Entertainment Weekly and The Nation had their field day with this story, indeed, only 1 week after Maines made her comments in London, in a review of that Dixie Chicks concert in London, a writer in the British newspaper The Guardian made an interesting connection between Natalie Maines' comments and the genres of country and bluegrass, and in particular, the unsuitability of a female banjoist. The very success that gave the Dixie Chicks 3 Grammys also posed, he wrote, an emasculating threat, precisely because, the writer observed, the group found its fame within a traditionalist musical rhetoric of banjos and whistles. Indeed, when Maines made her anti-Bush comments, the group was promoting its recently released Home, by far the trio's most traditional bluegrass and banjo-heavy CD to date. You know, when you do research on the banjo on the internet, if you go into Google or Yahoo and you do a search, For better or worse, one thing you'll come up with is not banjo art, but there's some banjo kitsch, banjo playing, banjo bedecked American flags, alarm clocks. You'll find a lot of jokes, a lot of banjo jokes. How many banjo players this or that? But the adeptness and seriousness of purpose that Emily Robeson brings to her banjo playing contrasts sharply with these jokes and comic sensibilities that have accompanied banjo music since the waning of minstrelsy in the early 20th century. The Dixie Chicks, and Robeson in particular, rewrote several time-honored rules, taking the banjo seriously, taking bluegrass seriously, and paying a dear price for doing so. The instrument finds less controversial but equally strong symbolism in the works of the contemporary mural painter and typographer Margaret Kilgallon, a San Francisco-based artist, surfer, and banjo player featured in the 2002 Whitney Biennial. In her brief career, cut short by breast cancer when she was 33 years old, Kilgallon mined the expressive possibilities of the most vernacular media and abject motifs. As one critic puts it, Kilgallon, quote, sought to revive things in danger of being forgotten. In this undertaking, she was particularly interested in conjuring up the spirits of obscure historical women by inviting them into her paintings, rescuing them from the abyss of his history, end quote. A foremost figure in her mission of cultural remembrance was the Depression-era female banjo player, Motoki Slaughter. I'll repeat the name, Motoki Slaughter, whose inclusion in Kilgallon's work seems natural, given that Kilgallon herself was a proficient banjo player. In a 1997 gallery installation, scattered about these random billboard-like tableau and vignettes are various images of a youthful pigtail Motoki Slaughter here at far right. It's kind of showing up here and there, holding the instrument. But in case you didn't know who Motoki Slaughter was by these small images, you certainly would when you saw the antiquated, gigantic saloon font spelling slaughter on what amounts to a gigantic billboard. In an interview held in conjunction with the Art 21 series on PBS television, Kilgallon explained her interest in Slaughter, pointing to the aging but memorable banjoist as a revered, strong woman and as one of her personal heroines. The interviewer commented, quote, "I'm sure there are many strong women you could name, but you seem only to paint a few," a point with which Kilgallon concurred. Well, like Motoki Slaughter, for instance, I got interested in old-time music, particularly the banjo, and the records I would play would have no women on them, ever. And she was the first woman who I ever saw on an old-time record, end quote. So what made Slaughter, Motoki Slaughter, iconic in Kilgallon's estimation was her status as a hard-working woman who built a career on musical performance, a career in which the banjo played a large role, acting as Motoki Slaughter's emblem of accomplishment. So much emphasis, Kilgallon observed, is put on how beautiful you are and how thin you are, and not a lot of emphasis is put on what you can do and how smart you are. She continued, I'd like to change that, change the emphasis of what's important when looking at a woman, end quote. By directing our eyes to the achievements of Motoki Slaughter, Kilgallon's art provides an important late 20th century example of how the banjo could subtly invoke female autonomy and how the instrument might figure in that discussion of what's important. Kilgallon apparently also understood the banjo within a nexus of economic exchange, and on at least one occasion depicted the instrument front and center in a pawn shop window, hanging over the jewelry and camera equipment in the glass display cases below. All of these are from an installation in San Francisco from 1997 called To Friend and Foe by Kilgallon. The irony and strength of Kilgallon, and maybe the Dixie Chicks' work, however, is that it refuses to relegate the banjo-wielding woman to the realm of flirty pawn, where market appeal is commensurate with sexuality. In Kilgallon's hands, the banjo functions as what we might call a discursive device, that is, a tool for telling stories, for relating history and exchanging ideas. Finally, I'd like to call attention to the work of the painter, filmmaker, and musician Claire Rojas, who has similarly seized the banjo as an information-carrying discursive tool. A close friend of Kilgallon's, Rojas has effectively picked up where the late muralist left off upon her death in 2001. Rojas' multimedia piece called JMPHAM, or JamFam, depicts the artist and her mother teaching each other to play the banjo. Rojas' materials and framing devices approximate the surface texture and compositional properties of a family quilt, which seems appropriate given the many late 19th century banjo pictures that incorporate the instrument as a vehicle for transmitting family history and tradition. Under the pseudonym Peggy Honeywell, Claire Rojas has released a few CDs featuring her singing, banjo picking, and guitar playing. In Worried Man, a banjo song from her 2004 CD, Faint Hums, deliberate picking links the two dubbed voices, much as the banjo compositionally unites the mirroring forms of artist and mother in JMPHAM. In this banjo song's final refrain, Honeywell addresses the listener on the topics of authorship and the musical medium itself. She sings, "If anyone should ask you who composed this song, say it was me, and I'll sing it all day long." Like Kilgallon, indeed like Mary Cassatt and Francis Benjamin Johnston, Claire Rojas employs the banjo in an act of witness, a documentation of oneself. Thank you.